Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raccoon, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a great week. I'd like to discuss Iphigenia and Aulis by Euripides. It's a late play from Euripides, possibly the very last tragedy he wrote. It wasn't first performed until after he had died. And it's a very strong play from Euripides. As with the best of his works, it's subversive, but the ways in which it is subversive, I think, make it more appealing to a modern reader or a modern audience. I think it's also a play that is very closely tied to its historical context, what was happening in Greece, what was happening in Athens, the Peloponnesian War. And so it really is a great entry point, a starter point for someone who's never read any of the works of Euripides. I'm going to include a link to a full text version of the play so you can read it. It'd take about an hour if you're not familiar with it at all, because I'm going to go into the plot, the themes, the historical context. So take a look if you'd like. Now, Iphigenia and Aulis begins at the very beginning of the Trojan War. The fleet has gathered. They're about to set sail for Troy and take Helen back and rescue her from those barbarians. That's the term they use. But the fleet hasn't sailed yet. The war hasn't really started yet because Calchas the seer has informed Agamemnon that the only way the fleet will be able to set sail and the winds will change is if Agamemnon is willing to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia to Artemis. Agamemnon doesn't really want to do this. And that's where we begin the play, is with Agamemnon sort of wrestling with this decision. Should he do this? He has a line in which he is pitying the decision he has to make. And he goes, "None of mortals is prosperous or happy to the last, for none was ever born to a painless life." Okay, true. But we're going to stick with that idea around life and painless life or painful lives as the play continues. And we are introduced almost immediately to that theme that pops up in a number of Greek tragedies, Antigone, the Oresteia as a whole. The question of where does one's true duty belong? Is it to the family or is it to the state? And Agamemnon's kind of trying to decide. And Menelaus, his brother, shows up. Helen's husband shows up. Iphigenia's uncle shows up to argue with Agamemnon about how Agamemnon's not really being a good brother and he's not being a good leader because he doesn't want to sacrifice his daughter. Menelaus is clearly representing the state, Agamemnon, the family. And they argue, and Agamemnon has this one great line that I think, again, ties to that historical context where he goes, "How dare you, argue with me and get on my case about changing my mind once I learned more information? That's a good thing." And Menelaus just, "Oh, I thought you were my brother." So things aren't going well there. And they leave. A message has been sent to get Clytemnestra, Agamemnon's wife, to bring their daughter Iphigenia to meet them there at Aulis, to meet the army. And the lie that they've told is that Iphigenia is going to be married to Achilles, the great warrior. Well, Clytemnestra is quite excited about this. And so then we get another critical scene where Menelaus comes up and tells Agamemnon, "Thought about it, you're right. We don't need to fight this war to go get Helen back. It's not worth it. Iphigenia doesn't need to die." And Agamemnon goes, "I thought about it too, and actually, we have to. I'm going to have to kill Iphigenia." Back and forth. The reason is, again, I think, tied to the historical context. We get this line. Agamemnon says, "The son of Sisyphus knows all." Menelaus, "Odysseus cannot possibly hurt us. He was ever shifty by nature, siding with the mob. True, he is enslaved by the love of popularity, a fearful evil." So they are now going to do something, move forward with something that they know is wrong. They've both agreed and come to the decision this is a wrong thing to do because they're afraid of Odysseus whipping up the mob. And it's important to note that they refer to him as the son of Sisyphus. Anytime Odysseus is referred to as the son of Sisyphus in a Greek work, that's bad. That's bad Odysseus. That's not Odysseus of the Odyssey where he's wise and he's thinking through things and he's cleverer than everyone and he's this resourceful warrior. That's the Odysseus on the night raid who is violating guest right, lying, and then murdering people to the point where he has to go purify himself after the night raid in the Iliad. That's the Odysseus who's a bad guy. He's a liar. Son of Sisyphus refers to this idea that Odysseus was actually the product of adultery, and as a bastard, he's corrupt and vile. Not the son of Laertes that he masquerades as. just for reference. And we will see that again later on in the play. Now, Clytemnestra and Iphigenia show up and they see Agamemnon. But before they see Agamemnon, Clytemnestra runs into Achilles, who's also on his way, and she's so excited to see her son-in-law. And we then get this scene that feels a little bit of like some slight situational comedy, where there's some irony. She's excited to see him. He's sort of like, hey, great, I'm on my way to fight. Then it becomes clear that they're having a cross conversation, and he's confused when he finds out that he's supposed to marry Iphigenia. That's news to him, and she was so excited. But then they catch up with an attendant who explains what's going on and what's going to happen to Iphigenia, and Clytemnestra is understandably horrified. Achilles is also very angry. Here's why. I have been listening to the tale of thy sufferings, and I am indignant to think I was used as a tool. Right or wrong, be darned. Don't put my name on it. Achilles is very angry. And he then tells Clytemnestra, I am going to consider Iphigenia my wife. They're not going to steal my bride to go get Menelaus' bride. And I'm going to fight for her. But, before I have to do that, and if you want to keep my rep up in front of my men, why don't we just ask Agamemnon one last time to not go through with this? And I think, okay, well, let's try that. So we now have this scene where Clytemnestra and Agamemnon are talking, and she's trying to draw it out of him, and he finally admits what he's going to do. And she goes into graphic detail about how she became his wife, how he had taken her from her first husband. He murdered the child she'd had with her first husband, and now he's going to murder their daughter together. And Agamemnon notes, I'm not great. Iphigenia then comes, having discovered what's going to happen, and pleads with Agamemnon in a couple of long speeches that are really, really wonderful. And she has a couple of great lines, one of which ends, full of trouble then it seems is the race of mortals, full of trouble verily, and 'tis ever fate's decree that man should find distress, which feels like something we find in Greek tragedies. That's a very Greek tragedy line. But it's very true. She is recognizing that she's innocent and she's supposed to be sacrificed so that a bunch of people can go to war and die over Helen. And she's identifying this as the person who's supposed to now be the victim. It is not a tragedy of Agamemnon agonizing over this. It will be her tragedy, that she will be the one who's murdered. And Agamemnon isn't sure what to do. But then Achilles comes back. Brave Achilles. The Achilles who just stomps on everybody across the Iliad. And, well, holy cow. He's afraid. They turned on him when he was going to fight. And Clytemnestra goes, even the Myrmidons? And he goes, they were the first ones. Thousands of them with Odysseus at their head. The son of Sisyphus, the very same. An evil choice indeed to stain his hands in blood. And Achilles is sort of willing to fight to the death over this. But Iphigenia steps forward and says, no, I'm going to willingly go as this innocent sacrifice to allow this to occur. Agamemnon earlier had pointed out that, listen, if we don't do this, Odysseus is going to get the whole mob together. They're going to kill us here. They're going to go to Argos, our city. They're going to sack that city and kill my whole family. So better one than all of these. And he's been told, this is the way he has his family in the game as well, because all of these other great kings are sending their sons to die, and these families are sending their sons to die. Well, he needs to contribute to the death toll as well. So Iphigenia goes to be sacrificed, and we get the Euripides plot twist, the Deus Ex Machina, the God in the machine. Except this time it happens off stage. So Clytemnestra is grief-stricken, she's weeping. Although Iphigenia has said she's going bravely, Achilles is going to be there to, for moral support, such that exists. And a messenger comes running on to say, wait a second. A whirlwind came. Right as we were about to, stab Iphigenia, a whirlwind came and took her up and left a hind lying there on the altar as the sacrifice. Artemis has taken Iphigenia to safety and kept her for herself. And then Agamemnon comes on and goes, yeah, and confirms the whole story about what happened. And it's interesting to note, the end of the play, that final description of what happens is exactly what is shared in Iphigenia among the Taurians. Another play by Euripides that was written about 10 years earlier that has Iphigenia as a priestess of Artemis among the Taurians. And that play takes place after the Trojan War, after everything else that happens after the Trojan War. That video will be coming later. So, you know, it's not quite a tragedy. Like, Iphigenia didn't die. She's not with her family anymore. The Trojan War can commence. State pride, civic pride there. But Agamemnon does seem morally compromised at this point. The whole Greek army, to a certain extent, is now sailing out, having been willing to murder an innocent person to commence their war. And I think that's a key aspect of it, is that Euripides is writing this at the very end of the Peloponnesian War. Now, it's not quite at the end. Athens hasn't actually lost the Peloponnesian War yet. But they've suffered certainly more defeats than they expected. We're over a generation now removed from the plague that took Pericles. We are about a decade on, almost a decade on from the disastrous Sicilian expedition to Syracuse, which is important, and I think there's a connection in the play. So the Peloponnesian War has, to a fair extent, not gone nearly as well as Athens thought it would. A lot of Athenians have died. A lot of people have lost their lives. I'm sure that there are families in the audience when this play is first being performed who have family members who have died during the Peloponnesian War. It's gone on for that long. There might have even been people who were performing in the chorus or as in the main roles who have lost family members during the Peloponnesian War. It just feels like that the probability is there. And so Euripides is writing this play about sacrificing the innocent to go start a war in which more people are going to die at the end of a massive war that has started. And he periodically has these moments where he has leaders saying, look, we know this is the right decision, but we're not going to do it because we're afraid of this person who's going to whip up the mob and then they'll all, attack us. And I think that's a very pointed criticism of what has been going on throughout the past generation as the Peloponnesian War has been conducted, particularly in the aftermath of the peace that Nicias had negotiated before the Sicilian expedition. So I think that's a key aspect of what's happening, because there's a really, really interesting line that gets in. I had noted the full of trouble then it seems is the race of mortals, full of trouble verily, and 'tis ever fate's decree that man should find distress. That and none of mortals is prosperous or happy to the last, for none was ever born to a painless life. Those feel like very Greek tragedy, tropes. But how about this one? Iphigenia says this: better live a life of woe than die a death of glory. And that suddenly feels different. It feels like, with life there's hope. With life, even though it might be painful, it might not be particularly impressive or full of accomplishment, I'll take that over these deaths of glory that win us a short-term victory, and we're still fighting this war. And I think that really is what's going on in Iphigenia and Aulis. I think the fact that it is right at the end of Euripides' life, he doesn't really have anything to lose at this point. He can say what's on his mind. He can comment on what he regards as a whole series of horrible decisions that have led to tragedy for so many people that he undoubtedly knew. And there's one last aspect to that, and that's where the chorus is their hometown. To the sandy beach of seacoast Aulis I came, after a voyage through the tides of Euripus, leaving Chalcis on its narrow firth, my city, which feedeth the waters of far-famed Arethusa near the sea. Arethusa near the sea was associated with a sort of a patron deity for none other than Syracuse in Sicily, the point at which Athens probably suffered its greatest strategic defeat in the Peloponnesian War on the disastrous Sicilian expedition just not quite a decade earlier. So for Euripides to have the chorus be people who are linked with Athens' worst defeat, and they're here to see this great war kick off with the sacrifice of an innocent, just feels a little on the nose. I think this is a fantastic play. It's one I highly, highly recommend. There are times when I've read the play where I question the ending and I'm thinking, Agamemnon's kind of a coward and kind of a loser and definitely willing to be a liar. Are the messenger and Agamemnon just lying to Clytemnestra about what happened with Iphigenia and the whole whirlwind and she was replaced by a hind? It does, I don't think Euripides had read the account of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, but it feels very parallel to that. Robert Graves in the Greek myths identifies that he thinks that's a sanitized ending to the original myth, and it might be. It is interesting though to note that Euripides takes the very beginning of Iphigenia among the Taurians and slaps it on as the very ending of Iphigenia in Aulis, to really give it this sense of link between the two plays. So maybe Euripides really doesn't mean for us to believe that, but I was just kind of questioning it. Now, I had mentioned some connections to other works. Euripides has many great plays. Medea is one of the strongest. This Grief Lessons translation, I'm looking forward to get into it, but this has Hecuba and Hippolytus, which again, I think are two of his probably most tragic plays, most like horrifying tragic plays. It also has Alcestis, which is less tragic and more just strange. It's interesting to read Iphigenia and Aulis and to think about that in comparison with the way Aeschylus describes this family in the aftermath of Iphigenia's murder in the Oresteia. Iphigenia among the Taurians takes up after the Eumenides of the Oresteia, so it'll be a nice bookend. There are ways in which Euripides is subversive that remind me of the ways I think Virgil could be subversive in the Aeneid. I mentioned, of course, the Greek myths from Graves. The way Helen is portrayed, despite Iphigenia being by far the bravest character of the play, Clytemnestra being a very strong character in terms of her rhetoric, the arguments she's able to make, her own courage and steadfastness, especially in comparison to Agamemnon. But it is interesting that the terms used for Helen are awful. Gorgias had an interesting encomium of Helen, or defense of Helen, that has come down. And of course, if we're going to talk about the Peloponnesian War, it would be useful to read Thucydides, or a more modern work Donald Kagan has, The Peloponnesian War. This is an abridgment of a multi-volume history he had done, but this is a great resource on the Peloponnesian War as well. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you've read this play by Euripides. Again, I enjoyed reading it. I was fortunate to read it with Stephanie Cohen and talk on Boxer as we were reading it, and just really enjoyed that discussion and how it illuminated the play for me. So I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks again.